Well, hello and welcome to the First Steps of God. Woo!
Hey.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Kandike.
Kandike.
Because I said at one point earlier, Kandike. I was like, no, that's not good. Kandike. And you are?
PJ.
Yeah.
And I'm Paul.
And I'm Bethy. And who do we have behind the camera?
Did we have Esau? Is it Esau on camera today?
Okay.
He's another giant slayer.
Oh, welcome Esau behind the camera. And we are hitting giants at the moment. So one of the giants we're going to look at in this particular show is looking at is scientific advancement and all the wonderful things we enjoy today and our intelligence and our academia. Does it come post-enlightenment?
That's an interesting one.
Does it come post-reformation? Did people have a brain before then?
I know, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Because there is that assumption, isn't it, that like PJ was telling us, he loves history and he's doing a degree in history. Yeah. But when you were younger...
Yeah, I hated history. When I was in school, I'd avoid history classes because the lesson was always, thank goodness you didn't live back then. Wasn't it terrible? Just each time it's like, now's the best time. And it made history very, very boring because it's like anything people get interested in. If there's like a fantasy show or game or something, the world has to be inviting. It's like, oh, I wish I lived in Narnia. People say that. It's like, oh, I wish I lived in Narnia. That wouldn't that be cool
Harry
to live
Potter
there?
Or something.
Yeah, to live in that, but then to be like, when you're instead being shown these completely like horrible worlds that they make the medieval world, and it's like, oh, they're all covered in mud, and
nobody knew anything. There was no education. The kings were cruel, and there was so much cruelty in the church. It was evil. That's what you hear. I had the same experience when I was in secondary school, high school, whatever term you want to use, where the only history we seemed to be taught was the two world wars, and also we were taught the Tudors, but the Tudors were always seen as, of course, you had Henry VIII who kept killing wives, and he was put up as the Christian king. Well, that's an interesting time period too, because the time, when did that kind of?
I know.
Just before then, there were soon around his time period, different things started happening.
I know, a lot of problems.
Moving into the modern era,
I know,
very
isn't
interesting.
It? Yeah.
Go back to the Middle Ages before, and go back to 2,000 years ago, and go back 4,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. You have huge, sophisticated civilizations.
And people lump in things. So they'll find, like, in the 14th and 15th century, as we're moving really into the Renaissance, and that isn't like a medieval sort of thing at all, they'll lump that in. So in those times, you have, like, restrictions on people learning to read and things. There start to be restrictions there. And they say, oh, that's a medieval period. That's not true. Charlemagne encouraged normal people to read. And
when was Charlemagne?
He started reigning in 768 AD, and then he was made emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, in 800 AD. So he had quite
a lot to engage in with Islam.
Yeah,
he did.
And he's quite prominent in actually not bringing Islam right north and stopping the invaders again, who were these tribal slave warriors that had come into Spain. Now, by that point, established in Spain, but were trying to move north. And it was a real invasion, wasn't it?
His, I think it was his granddad, or he's certainly descended from Charles Martel. Incredible. So his dynasty was the Carlings or the Carolingians, named after Karl the Hammer, Charles Martel. And so he was the famous one.
The hammer because he stopped the Islamic armies.
Tours. They got, if you look at Tours on like a map, it's like way north in France, really, compared to what you'd think. Because like people imagine like, oh, they were getting into France and think, oh, maybe they got like near the bottom, near Toulouse, maybe. No, they got all the way. And Charles Martel.
And what's so interesting about that on the education front and knowledge is when you think Spain, before the Muslims invaded, you've got someone like Isidore of Seville, who produced this, what is now called this like a big encyclopaedia of like all the knowledge. It'd be like the Encyclopaedia Britannica today, where he's trying to gather together all the knowledge in the world, kind of thing, doesn't he? And he has animals and everything.
Well, so many people say, well, no, that's what Islam did, but actually, this is prior.
This is prior, and this guy wrote these amazing books, and they were centres of education and learning, and then the Islamic armies coming to Spain, all of those disappear.
Yes,
And they have a mixed relationship, a lot of these caliphs, because Spain becomes its own caliphate. And they show some. There's one guy who like collected all the books in Spain in this one building, and they say he's very good and he like promoted learning and everything. He's succeeded by a guy who burns the whole thing down with all the books. So then you see like one shining example, one like horrendous example. But in Christendom, like these monasteries maintain for centuries that standard of learning. And some people want to learn more, some people want to learn less, but there's a standard maintained. Whereas in Islam, there's some people who do seem to really care, other people really seem to hate learning.
There's not a consistency.
Yes.
So it's that vision that I think, like going to the modern myths, the modern idea is, people in the medieval period, they all like lived till they were like 20, died of illness.
Nobody could read and write.
Yeah, they lived in mud huts, they were all ignorant, and then all the
you
rulers
had
were...
horrible, nasty lord or king at the top.
And they were just tyrannical, like fascists and things like that. And you're like, no. Like when you go back, the level of learning and education. Here's an interesting thing. Cathedrals, when you go into a cathedral from that period, nowadays you go in and all the walls are like burst stone and things like that. They are incredibly beautiful. So first of all, the fact of cathedrals tells you a lot about the medieval world. So that they built these, even today they're the best buildings anywhere. So
our buildings all fall down.
Ours like fall down after 10 years or something, and these ones are like, is it? Yeah, whereas they're better at building than we are. But did you know this? That in the period, the walls were painted in bright colours.
I didn't.
Yeah. So the cathedrals, if you'd gone into, nowadays we go in, it's burst stone. But increasingly people are discovering they actually painted murals and things.
So where on earth has this idea come from that it was the church that brought in a dark age, or that it was a church that was uneducated and all the people were uneducated? Where has this come from? This is rubbish.
Yeah, who brought it? Isn't it? Who brought in that sort of language describing it as a dark age?
Well, the dark age, that term was invented by people in the Renaissance who liked to look back to the classical sort of era, and then they saw this Christian age. So the classical era where the majority religion was paganism, they looked back to that and looked up to it. And then they obviously had to make a way to try and make Christendom look backwards and to try and replace it. So they were trying to make people excited instead of those thinkers and incredible thinkers they tried to make them think about like Homer and and these are like fun things to read, but it's not what a good civilization's built on. You can look at ancient Greece, like how they acted and how brutal they were and brutal, and compare it
terrible
to medieval
for women and things like that. Yeah, and yet they were like, no, the Dark Ages was the Christian period. So even to use a phrase like Dark Age, or even actually Middle Ages, what middle of what? Even that, it's like saying, well, there was the Greek pagans with the suppression of women, slavery, killing everybody, conquering nations, and all that sort of thing. They were good. And then there were all this middle period. Then they go, there's a middle period, which is dark.
That's a giant of a myth.
Isn't it? Isn't it? I know. And you just go, people go.
They knew there was the end of the world was coming at some point, so they were in the middle.
And maybe that's what they thought, the middle. But it's even like that. So let's never, if we're Christians anyway, never refer to that as the Dark Ages. Let's call it the Light Ages.
And many historians are beginning to recognize, even those who have no religious affiliation, are beginning to recognize that Dark Age is not the best term. Even reading the early church fathers from
the
very early on,
they
thought and addressed every topic under the sun. It was amazing. We wouldn't have half the debates we have in society if we just read the early church fathers and we just read these wonderful Christian kings. We read their testimonies.
Isn't it? I'll just give you an amazing example. There's a guy called Basil of Caesarea who was thinking about the universe, and he was thinking, I wonder what the stars are made of. Because he said all the pagans believed that they were like spiritual being, and they were like infinitely old or eternal. And he said, no, that stuff that's in the sky, the stars, is the same stuff as the soil. Like the whole universe must be made of the same basic stuff. Because he thought about it, the Bible says it was all made at the same time. Modern science, we go, oh yeah, we discovered that. We figured out that they were made of rocks and things. And it's like, no, Basil of Caesarea, like 1800 years ago, could have told you that very thing.
Hold on to that thought. More of that in the next session. Bye.